Hey, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to take your hands like this and hold it like that for a while, and hopefully you won't get some kind of repetitive motion injury out of this. Mark Hall, in his book Thrive, he's also one of the lead singers and players for Casting Crowns, talks about this tree that grows at the junction of see if I can get this right, the Choctawhatchee and Pea Rivers in Geneva, Alabama. It's a tree by the water, and it grows there at the junction of these two rivers. And he began in youth ministry in Geneva, Alabama, and he would take his children, his youth, to that tree. And when he goes, he started another ministry in other churches, and every once in a while he brings his children, his youth, to that tree. And he said one day they were looking at the tree, and this farmer came up to them and said to them, "Did you know?" He said, "Did you know that the roots of that tree grow as deep and as wide as the branches you see on the outside of the tree?" He said the roots of the tree grow as deep and as wide as the branches that you see on the surface. Now think about that. That's a powerful metaphor for our spiritual life. If you're getting tired, you can put your hands down. It's a powerful metaphor for our spiritual life. That our capacity to reach, our capacity to be generous, our capacity to grow in the likeness of Christ on the outside, on the part we see, is very much related to how deep and wide we're growing on the inside. That's a great image because it challenges me to ask the questions about my own spiritual life and my own journey. Is my spiritual life growing as deep and as wide in the places you can't see as what you do see? And how about for you? Is your spiritual life growing as deep and as wide in the parts and places we can't see, in your heart of hearts, as the call of Christ to you on the outside? And of course, the other side of that, which is very challenging to me, is, when I don't feel like my reach and my love and my imitation of Christ is very big on the outside, what does that tell me about how deep and wide, how deep into the reserves of the love of God am I really living? So there's two primary principles I want you to walk home as I speak briefly about growing those roots. And here's the first thing. He said, how we face the future and how we make decisions is based upon what we believe about God and what we believe about ourselves. When we're talking about thriving. How we face the future and make decisions are based upon what we believe about God and what we believe about ourselves. How many times do we find ourselves painting God in a box? That we see and understand that God works in our world and in our lives, and in some understanding that we have about God, instead of God showing us what we need to know about God. How often do we prescribe what God can and cannot do in our lives, instead of allowing God to show us? I love Phoebe's story, because those are out-of-the-box experiences of the presence of God. And it's not the first time I've heard something like that in a similar situation. I know another family this week that had a powerful answer to prayer for a job. And they're celebrating. There are challenges in this new job, but they're celebrating. Because they're discovering God, again, does not paint within the boxes we prescribe for God. So how do we expand our root systems? How do we grow deep and underneath so that our reach out, what people see on the outside, is as big as what's growing on the inside? Let me say three basic fundamental things just to remind you as we head into the new year and new possibilities. Number one, you need to grow a devotional life. You need to take time to be with God. Michael Slaughter says he spends an hour a day in Bible reading, in journaling, in studying. Now, I don't do an hour a day. I do about half an hour a day. Well, how about your devotional life? Do you have a devotional life? Do you take time to pray with God, maybe to journal, and especially to read Scripture? There are just a bunch of resources you can tap into for your devotional life. Right outside the sanctuary, we have upper rooms, the printed pages. You can order so many things online, but you can also go online and download some devotionals. So a lot of those that we use in our weekly prayers, in our weekly emails, or daily emails, come out of some of those devotional lives. This morning, I was looking at the devotional from the United Methodist Church. That's from the upper room. Go online to the upper room. You can subscribe to the upper room. They'll send you a devotional every day. Something to help challenge you or shape your prayer life, your time with God. Take 10 minutes. The United Church of Christ, probably a more progressive-leaning denomination, has their own daily devotionals. Some of them we use, some we don't. But that's another source you can go to. Or maybe you can go to the Daily Bread online and have those devotions sent to you. And I encourage you to do what I do, which is use a variety of sources, a variety of different theological perspectives to get a fuller sense of how much God does paint outside the box. And it's interesting what the writer of the Upper Room Daily Reflection said this morning. He wrote today, part of learning to pray continually is to stay open in prayer. He says sometimes after we say amen, he's talking about having a devotional life or a prayer life, we check off the prayer on our to-do list and shut down the conversation. He writes, but God has invited us, called us to pray without ceasing, to keep the conversation going all day, every day. Good reminder. If you want your outreach that people can see to match your root system underneath, develop and grow a prayer life. The second thing is to grow your community life, whether that's small groups or worship or some experience where you're gathered in the community of people who are on the journey too. There may be people who are new on the journey of faith. There may be people who have been walking with Christ all of their lives, but get in a small group or in a study as they come up in the fall, or invite someone, or come to worship, because this is how God grows us. We are far more who God has created us to be in the community of one another than we can ever be and become by ourselves. Rudy is your brother-in-law, correct? And Ruth is your sister. When Ruth is here after Rudy passed away, she was talking about the community in which she and Rudy, who's passed away, lived in. It's a real Orthodox Jewish community. And they're strict Orthodox. You know, it's like when it's Sabbath in that community, and she's surrounded by Orthodox Jews all around her. They don't do any work, and they do as little as possible because that's how they're living out of their faithfulness to God. They don't even turn on lights, correct? And any basic thing that they may need to do that's counted as work, they call on their neighbors, on Rudy and Ruth, to do for them. And I thought, whoa, that's pretty, you know. But then I got to think about it. Imagine what that teaches that community of Jewish Orthodox believers of God about their need for dependency on the lives of others as a community of faith. What a powerful thing. It may seem silly to me as sometimes that they go through, but it's really their way of living out their faithfulness and understanding that they really live in a community of dependency on others in order for their faith to come alive. I was reading this week about Sabbath rules, and one of the things that Sabbath does, you know, you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath or be engaged in some kind of economic activity. And one of the writers said the power of Sabbath is it breaks this feeling of economic dependency on others or uncertainty. And Sabbath enables them to underscore their dependency on God. It's a way of showing that labor is not the final aim of our lives. That instead we are called to set aside both labor and consumption if you really honored the Sabbath in favor of rest and non-consumption, and just letting your spirit recover, and the commitment to productivity in a Sabbath observance is set aside in favor of loyalty to God. Setting aside commitment to productivity so that you can demonstrate loyalty to God. I read this week that Forbes magazine said that the richest 86 people in the world hold as much wealth in property and assets as 3.5 billion people. Think about that. 86 people in the world hold as much of the world's wealth as half of the world's population. And 7 of them hold as much wealth as 46 countries combined. When we think about the power of the Sabbath understanding of being able to say, we want to be dependent on God more than we want to be on the system, that we want to set aside a desire for consumption and labor in order to show that we're going to rest in God, that's a powerful statement in a world just like the one in which we live in. We are shaped by community. Finally, we are shaped by our devotional life. Our roots grow deep through our sense of commitment to community and growth together in demonstrating in our community life our dependency and love for God, and we are shaped by our sacrificial life. Great quote from Mark Hall. What you direct your hands to do reflects the condition of your heart when it comes to service and sacrifice. What you direct your hands to do reflects the condition of your heart. Our actions are an outward expression of our inner reality. And if you could divide up how you spend your time, if you could divide up how you spend your resources, if you could divide up how you prioritize your time and schedule, what would it say? What would that say about your inner reality? Is your heart breaking for the things that are breaking God's heart? Shane Claiborne is one of the principals in a community called The Simple Way. He came from Georgia. He moved to Philly to kind of start a Acts 2 community, a people who pooled their resources, a people who tried to grow in Christian, who strive to grow in Christian community together, and who engage of acts of Christ-based justice. If you ever read the blog called Red Letter Christians, he's one of the people that contribute to that. And he talked about moving to Philadelphia, and they intentionally chose an area in Philadelphia which was, kind of transitional and questionable. And he talked about going to a grocery store with Michelle, another member of their community, and they walked down the store to the grocery store, but they had to go through the red light district of Philadelphia in order to get there. You know what I mean by that, right? They're ladies of the evening selling themselves. Human trafficking. And they came, and this one woman saw Shane, and she started propositioning him. He was all embarrassed and tried to kind of shoo her away. And they kept going to the grocery store, and they got to the grocery store, bought their supplies, bought their bread, and head back home. They got home and discovered that the bread they had was kind of old and crusty, and luckily Michelle had the receipt, so they decided to go back, and guess where they had to go walk through the red light district again to get to the store, but the woman that propositioned him wasn't there, and after they got the bread and got good bread this time, they turned the corner and saw down the alley that same woman crying and shivering in the cold and remembering who they were. Red Letter Christians, people who follow Jesus. They looked at each other and they knew what they needed to do. They walked over to her and they exchanged names and asked how she was doing. She said, we live right around the corner. If you want to come and get warm, we'd love to have you. We have food there if you're hungry. And she looked up at them and she looked in their eyes and she said, "You're Christians, aren't you?" And he said, "I looked at my T-shirt, see if it showed or something, And he said, "Yes." And she said, "I knew it." She said, "I used to be a Christian once. I used to shine in my love for God." She said, "But this world is a tough world. It's a hard world. And sometimes I just can't make it. And I've lost my shine. So she came with them, and they sat in the room and got to know each other, and eventually she left. He said about 6 weeks later, a knock came at the door, and he opened the door, and he saw this woman, and he didn't recognize her, and he said, "Hey," she said, "Hey, how are you?" And he's like, "Hey, who are you?" And she's like, "You remember me? I got my shine on now." And then he remembered exactly who it was. She said, "I just wanted to come and thank you for helping me when I had hit rock bottom." She said, "Because I've rediscovered God in my life again, and I got my shine back." And she said, "I would have never begun that journey if it hadn't been for you." And he thought about that, and it touched his heart, and he realized sometimes the littlest thing makes all the difference in the world. See, he was a person that had decided that his reach on the surface was going to be as big as what he had growing underneath. What about you? What are you doing, and who are you listening to? How are you growing underneath? And what are you going to do in this next year to grow your roots underneath so that the life and love of Jesus is more evident in your life up here? What are you going to do to say that in your heart of hearts, you know you are more than made to survive, you are made to thrive, and to know that He lives in your heart? Let us pray. God, it's a challenge. We are human. We are weak sometimes, and sometimes even our best intentions, the goals we set, we sometimes can't meet it because life gets in the way. We find ourselves in dry places, but we are so grateful that we know a God who invites us to take and throw our roots deep in living water. Challenge us to grow our roots, that our reach would be as grand and as deep as the roots you grow. Help us set aside some sacred moments every day for prayer and Bible. Help us, God, to be committed to the gathering of community together, because we are more by your presence with us together than we could ever be alone. And help us always to grow our reach. The light and love of Christ could live through us, and people would see on the outside that Jesus lives, that He lives. All God's people say.